Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing confusion over who can successfully opt out of the state's long-term care plan, what a federal shift on marijuana means for Washington's cannabis market, Seattle police getting a raise for the first time in 3 years, and the mayor of Spokane's push for a new tax hike to plug the city's budget hole. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Do you care about classroom curriculum, transparency policies, and how your taxpayer dollars are invested in education, but you find it hard to cut through the partisan noise? Chalkboard News is bringing you straight news reporting on public K-12 education. We're talking news without spin. Chalkboard News publishes fact-based stories that make sense to parents, teachers, and readers who have skin in the game. Get this news delivered to your inbox for free by signing up at chalkboardnews.com. Subscribe today at chalkboardnews.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now let's jump into the headlines. Washington's mandatory long-term care benefit program takes 58 cents out of every $100 earned deducted from workers' paychecks, unless the employee successfully opted out by proving that they already had existing coverage before it went into effect. But now there seems like there's some crossed wires about when and who can successfully stop that money from being taken out. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson covered a pretty confusing hearing. What happened at this meeting, Carlene?
So this was their monthly hearing with Employment Security, which that's the agency here in Washington charged with coming up with the rules for how the Washington Cares long-term care benefit program will operate once the payouts start in. So this hearing included staff members from ESD. And a lot of the questions for the first, or a lot of the conversation for the first 20 or so minutes of the meeting was, okay, if somebody needs long-term care, can my family member be trained and subsequently then be paid by my long-term care account? A lot of discussion along those lines. But during the Q&A at the end, towards the end of this webinar, someone asked ESD, what's going to happen for folks who have, got those private long-term care plans before, so they were exempt from having the payroll tax taken out. What if people want to dump that program now? Am I then obligated to get into WA Cares? Because that was the whole point, right? To make sure everybody's got long-term care coverage, and that'll benefit everybody. And the answer from the staffer from Employment Security was, well, yes, absolutely. If you got that one-time exemption and you attested to that, you're going to have to provide new attestation that says, yeah, I've still got my long-term private care plan. A couple more questions later, someone asked the same thing in a slightly different way, and he reiterated, yes, you're obligated to either keep that plan or we're going to change the law so that we can take new enrollees into the WA Cares program. Fast forward to Monday morning of this week, and they put a little note underneath the webinar that said the ESD staff member had misunderstood the question. And in fact, if you want to dump your private long-term care plan, go ahead. You're good.
And that's a little confusing to walk that back, especially, and you pointed it out that the state, employee that answered these questions answered it the same way twice. And I think that the people asking those questions probably thought, okay, well, that's significant. You need to restate that. Are you sure? And he seemed very clear on what he had said. And then to have this walked back, I believe you said it was in the comments of the YouTube video or something like that, right?
Yeah, they put a big note on there, the so-and-so, Jeff, I can't recall the gentleman's last name, but at this point, but a staff member, one of the ones charged at Employment Security with coming up with all these rules for how WA Cares is going to roll out once the benefits, the payouts begin. Yeah. He very clearly understood the question. That's my sense of it. Now, the problem is at this point, you've also got a lot of confusion out there about how everything is going to work. And the problem there also is you've got Initiative 2124 is going to be on the ballot in November. And that's going to ask voters, do you want to repeal this thing and have the option to opt out?
Right, and to be able to opt out at any time, because that's the freedom that initiative is trying to bring forth. so that people aren't locked into having a portion of their paycheck deducted every time they get paid, only to, to say they move away, or there's a ton of reasons why they wouldn't be able to use the service that they've been paying for years. Part of this too is that the person you had spoke to brought up a point that the department at this point is now walked this back and said, if you drop it, you can drop your long-term care, private long-term care coverage that you used to opt out. But they said that it does not really matter what they're saying right now because they're the ones that can make the rules.
They can change it at any time. Well, state lawmakers can change how the rules work or how the law looks, right? And then employment security, they're tasked with coming up with how this will all play out. But state lawmakers, with Democrats in the majority in both chambers and the governor's mansion, can do anything they want. The other interesting piece is what this does to the long-term care insurance market. I got a couple of emails after our story was published this week about this from folks in the long-term care insurance business saying, wait a minute, talk about what this is going to do. Now I've got all these people that came to me in a rush to buy a plan so that they could get themselves out of the WA Cares program. Now, State of Washington, you're saying, go ahead, dump the plan. I mean, these people are getting it from both sides in the insurance industry. And they're none too pleased.
Right. That's quite a distortion in an otherwise pretty secure market where it's just buy it, set it, and forget it for years. And to have suddenly on the beginning end of this, that mad rush to sign up for all of these long-term care programs so that they could get around being forced into the WA Cares program. And now being able to say, well, I don't want this pulled out anyway, even if it's a private company, that it shakes a lot of boats. And in terms of WA Cares, one thing that we brought up before is that this, we've been told, gives a bit of a false sense of security if you do pay into WA Cares, because if you think, okay, well, I'm come to the age where I need to, I'm of the need for this, and then you go to apply for WA Cares funding for a long-term care service provider, it's not going to last long.
Yeah, $36,500 if you've had anybody. Many of us have had somebody we've had to put into, say, it's a memory care facility. Those are more expensive for long-term care. It's going to last you about 3 months in the state of Washington for the average care facility right now. And most of us are going to have a loved one, hopefully around a lot longer than that. One last quick thing, Cole, on the May 1st, Wednesday meeting this week on this, a lot of discussion into the fact that now can my family member be trained, right, and then be paid out of my account to take care of me. The state of Washington is at this point going to force every family member who wants to do that to go into a union. You'll pay union dues.
They'll unionize them, really?
They're saying they're going to unionize and have control over the caregivers, even if that's my daughter that wants to take care of me. So that's a whole nother layer that we probably shouldn't be surprised here in the state of Washington is now in discussion.
Well, that'll likely be under, I'm assuming, SEIU, which is a public
That's exactly what they're going into.
And if you did not want to join that union, even though they said they would force you into it, you could exercise your Janus v. AFSCME rights and say that I do not want my union dues going towards political speech and political
Still have to go through their training, though. Still have to go through the
still have to go through the training, exactly, right, which is an undue cost.
Yeah, that's
excellent.
A good point.
Thank you, Carlene. We'll follow this as it unfolds, which there's plenty more to peel off that onion. News broke last week that President Biden's administration would make good on an earlier promise to scale back the federal classification of cannabis. The new move takes it out of the same league as heroin and LSD and puts it more akin to ketamine and anabolic steroids. While still illegal, what does this mean in terms of a change for Washington, which was one of the first states to legalize the plant for recreational use back in 2012? Washington editor Brett Davis looked into this. Brett, what did you find as to how this is going to affect Washingtonians?
Basically, the Justice Department confirmed that the Drug Enforcement Agency is proposing to move marijuana from Schedule 1 status to Schedule 3 status under the Controlled Substance Act. As you hinted at in your introduction, it's basically a move to reclassify marijuana as a lower risk substance. This could have major impact on Washington, which, as you noted, is a pioneer state when it comes to the legal cannabis industry. So back in December 6th of 2012, Washington became the first state in the nation to legalize recreational use of marijuana and the first to allow recreational marijuana sales alongside Colorado. And way back in 1998, Washington previously legalized medical marijuana. So we have a lot of experience with marijuana in this state.
Trailblazing Washingtonians. That's right.
I see what you did there.
Emphasis on the blazing. So, Brett, the biggest change to this will be mainly tax implications, though, correct?
Right. So I reached out to Aaron Pickus. He's with the Washington Cannabis Business Association, and he told me that moving marijuana to Schedule 3 has a major tax policy implications for state legal cannabis businesses. If reclassification is ultimately implemented, it would mean marijuana businesses can officially take federal tax deductions that they've been barred from under an Internal Revenue Service code known as 280E, which basically it forbids businesses from deducting otherwise ordinary expenses from gross income associated with, and I'm going to put this word in air quotes, trafficking of Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 substances, as defined by the Controlled Substances Act.
Well, and there's also, he had said, I don't know how you say his name, but it's got other pharmaceutical applications then could be applied to cannabis, and mainly the psychoactive chemical THC, right?
Right. This reclassifying cannabis as a Schedule 3 drug removes the plant from the most dangerous list and recognizes that it does, in fact, have some medical uses. This could open up a pathway for pharmaceutical companies to get involved in the cannabis industry, whether through development and sales of pharmaceutical cannabis or even through research. So some interesting implications with this upcoming change.
Right. This joint brought to you by Pfizer. Thank you. All right. Now, how much cannabis have you Washingtonians been smoking lately? I'm curious about.
A lot, it would seem. So, according to the Marijuana Business Daily, the Evergreen State over each of the last few years, 2023 and 2022, has sold more than $1 billion. That's billion with a B, more than $1 billion in adult use marijuana. So, apparently, we like our weed here in Washington.
Yeah, you're not Colorado or Illinois, but that's definitely up there. Now, the one thing that it always sticks with me about these that I had to ask about is the banking issue. Cannabis shops, famously banks that are FDIC insured, will not work with businesses that sell cannabis because it's still technically illegal at a federal level, and they don't want to risk losing that FDIC insurance. Does this change the fact that cannabis shops can't use banks at all?
It does not. Talking to Aaron Pickus, he noted that financial institutions, they basically, as you said, don't want anything to do with money from the marijuana industry, because they're afraid it would expose them to legal trouble from the federal government. The industry as a whole is urging that Congress adopt what's called the Safer Banking Act. That's an acronym for the Secure and Fair Enforcement Regulations Banking Act, which would allow banks to provide services to the cannabis industry in those states like Washington where it's legal. Right now it's an all cash business, and that makes it a good target for criminals.
Exactly. Yeah. And you'll see too, new cannabis shops that pop up sometimes set up shop in old banks because they have a vault. And if you cannot, if you cannot place your money somewhere, you're not burying the money or you're not putting cougarans in your backyard. It makes a lot of sense for these cannabis shops to open up in a place that's already got a secure vault as such, which it was something just fascinating that I didn't realize until a couple years into cannabis recreational legalization. But we will follow this from the Washington angle and see if anything else unfolds. Thank you, Brett. Now on to the other side of the law, we check in with the Seattle Police Department, where officers have secured their first department-wide raise now in 3 years. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly reported on the agreement. Spencer, give us the details of the deal.
Well, the main takeaways are a retroactive wage increase for Seattle police officers from 2021 through 2023. Now, there's a 15.3% increase for retroactive wages for last year. And this is all done as an attempt to build more recruiting options for Seattle police. This gives the police department more competitive pay amongst other cities and counties out here in Washington.
Yeah, it's this puts them in line. It looks like more of a right sizing instead of trying to put them far and above officers anywhere else in the state. And that mainly, this is seeing the quotes from the mayor. This all comes amid a massive shortage of officers, and he attributed it to that. They were, I have to credit Seattle politicians. They are fairly straightforward and honest about their shortage that they're facing. Go over the current numbers again.
Yeah, well, the most up-to-date statistics I have for you are Seattle Police Department have lost a net of around 340 officers since 2019. Last year alone, they only hired 61 people out of 1,948 applications. That's about 3%. The most up-to-date information I have of how many deployable officers that are available in the city of Seattle is 913 as of January.
A city that big with fewer than 1,000, and that's a key thing you'd mentioned too, deployable officers, because there are police officers that for one reason or another, maybe they're on desk duty or they've got, they're not trained to be a beat cop, they're, ministerial or for whatever reasons, but they're still technically a police officer. That's a key number because you think like Seattle, in terms of total population and then officers per total population, are they still the lowest in the nation?
They are definitely one of the lowest in the nations just because of this. And you can look back at, since 2020 when the George Floyd protests happened and, the defund police movement, it's caused a lot of issues between, the city of Seattle police and the city residents. And that divide has caused issues where people are not wanting to join this police force. Because of this, they're going to face a lot of, judgment, persecution from the public.
You'd reported it on stories before about how in these exit interviews and speaking with former Seattle police officers that have taken the retirement deals and such, the department's developed a reputation for not being the easiest place to work in the last 4 or 5 years. That has to be on the forefront of people's minds when they decide to either go to Seattle or maybe Kirkland. For instance.
Here's another thing too, is that, Seattle working in a police department in a big city gives you opportunities to do proactive policing, joining different criminal investigations. But when you have a staff shortage like this, everyone has to do patrol duty, your standard police work. And that just is not something that a lot of these officers want to do. That's not the route they want to go. You could do that in any other cities and probably get paid more.
Yeah, no, I get that. And that's another situation where if you have a lack of investigative officers, that then runs you into a situation where you're not solving some of the unsolved crimes and your resolution rate, your case closure rate then could struggle. Chicago had seen that. That was a notorious problem that dogged Chicago for years. And speaking of other cities, SPD's also seen efforts to recruit their officers out from under them. Places like Florida, Arizona have come to Seattle and try and take these officers.
Yeah, this is something that the city has done just because, it's much easier to look outward where maybe there's not much knowledge of what's going on within the city of Seattle. That is a route they are taking. You can provide, opportunities to show people that, Seattle is this place that you can come and stay, live. You could be a police officer here, but there's opportunities to go, explore, Mount Rainier, for example.
Right, exactly.
Like that, give those people the type of, basically like a tourism type of ad placement, I would say.
No, that makes sense. So this agreement, though, and getting back to it, it's not just a pay bump, right? I read that in your story there's some accountability measures attached.
Yes. So there are accountability measures attached, including, requiring an arbitrator for discipline appeals, in cases when the police chief imposes discipline for officer misconduct. There's other little tiny technicalities, including improving timelines for investigations of alleged officer misconduct by telling a 180-day timeline for criminal proceedings. A lot of other things, as well as, increasing the number of civilian investigators in the Office of Police Accountability by 2. That way that some of these smaller reports or anything like that, police officers don't have to attend, but can just leave to someone else.
Minor crimes, right?
Yeah.
Well, best of luck to Seattle PD and trying to bolster their numbers. But we move out east to Spokane, where freshman mayor Lisa Brown gave her first State of the City speech this week. She outlined the city's budget hole, her plan to fix it, and a vision for changes in a number of areas in the city. Eastern Washington reporter Tim Klauser covered the event. Tim, what was the main theme of this speech?
Yeah, Cole. So it seemed like the main theme of Lisa Brown's State of the City address was pushing for a better quality of life for the citizens of Spokane. And she wants to do this through pushing for a few of her priorities. The biggest being taking care of the city's deficit, which is upwards of $50 million right now, through a public safety levy, as well as securing affordable housing to really batten down on the city's issue with homelessness.
There was a little bit of fire and brimstone behind her push for that public safety levy. She got into what she's saying will happen if voters don't approve of this new tax.
Yeah, so it's still unclear what exactly could happen if this tax isn't approved. But when she initially proposed it, she did mention that around 200 people could lose their jobs if this tax is not approved on the August ballot. And she said, if so, that the city would undoubtedly feel the effects in terms of public safety. But we've heard some different numbers in the weeks since it was proposed. Some city council members have said during their weekly meetings that they've heard estimates of around 170 people, with around 20 to 50 of those people being within the police and fire departments. So at a minimum, we can say that public safety will be impacted if we lose these personnel. The city won't be able to update its vehicle fleet that's reaching the end of its life. They won't be able to update fire facilities, which they want to do in the coming months, among other items.
Now, this public safety levy is, in terms of comparing to others that the city's seen recently, this is not exactly a small increase, correct?
No, not really. So this levy would cost taxpayers around $1 per $1,000 of assessed property value. So around a $30 increase per month for the median home value of around $330,000. But it's a little bit more of a jump compared to, say, the parks levy, which was also proposed to reach the August ballot, which is instead being pushed to February. That levy was proposed at 29 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. So this public safety levy is estimated to bring in around $40 million a year.
Fairly large. You're talking over $100 million over the next 4 to 5 years. Now, when this was initially presented, Tim, it appeared as though it was marketed that all of that money would be earmarked for police, fire enhancements. Public safety is a very good sell in terms of an electoral favorability. The messaging since then, it feels like has changed a little bit, even though there were acknowledgments in the beginning of the reality of the situation. But explain where the majority of this new tax increase is going.
Yeah, so it seems like the majority of this tax revenue would go towards filling the city's general fund deficit, which is currently at around $25 million. It seemed like when it was initially proposed that a lot of this money would go towards enhancements, but since the police and fire services are funded by that general fund, this levy revenue would go towards the general fund. Technically, the city could move revenue around as needed to fill holes in the budget. Lisa Brown did point out in her State of the City address that for the first year, the majority of this levy revenue would go towards filling that hole, with around 10 to 12 million going towards these enhancements.
The majority of the initial revenue would basically fill the budget hole, and then a little bit of it would go towards the enhancements. To be fair to her, it sounds like there's going to be more money going into the enhancements as the budget hole is then filled this year and they level their budget out. And it's worth noting that Spokane voters have responded to ballot measures that would increase their property tax bill, not retain levies. They've not responded well to that recently. But thank you, Tim. I appreciate your time on this. And a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories as well. Stay up to date on these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.